Pay attention to the woman in the gray peacoat, stepping off the number 47 bus. Her name is Julia Brenner. She is 24 years old. She works as a medical receptionist at a pediatric clinic in Lakewood. Tonight, she's returning home from her evening shift at the hospital, where she picks up extra hours twice a week. In her tote bag, a half-eaten turkey sandwich, a paperback thriller from the library, and her apartment keys on a keychain shaped like a stethoscope, a gift from her younger sister. Julia is tired, but in good spirits. She has the weekend off. She plans to sleep in tomorrow. Now pay attention to the man standing near the bus shelter. His name is Kofi Mensah. He is 38 years old. He emigrated from Ghana 7 years ago and works nights as a custodian at the community college 2 miles from here. He appears to be waiting for the next bus. He is not. At 9:18 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd, Julia Brenner steps off that bus at the corner of Riverside and Hayes. Within 20 minutes, her phone would go dark. Within an hour, she would vanish completely. This was not a chance encounter. It was a carefully planned abduction. Julia Brenner lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the Riverside district, a working-class neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and aging brownstones. She had moved there 18 months earlier, attracted by the affordable rent and the short commute to work. Her mother, Patricia Brenner, lived 40 minutes away in the suburbs. They spoke every Sunday morning, without fail. The evening of November 3rd began like any other Friday. Julia clocked out of her hospital shift at 8:45 p.m. She texted her friend Megan to confirm brunch plans for Sunday. She bought a coffee from the vending machine on the second floor. She walked 3 blocks to the bus stop on Chambers Street and boarded the number 47 at 8:58 p.m. Security cameras at the hospital entrance captured her leaving. She was smiling at something on her phone. The number 47 bus route runs a loop through the eastern neighborhoods, making 23 stops before returning to the transit center downtown. Julia's stop was the 14th. The bus was half empty that night, a Friday evening after rush hour. The driver would later tell investigators that Julia sat near the middle, reading her book under the overhead light. She seemed relaxed. She seemed safe. At 9:18 p.m., the bus pulled to the curb at Riverside and Hayes. Julia gathered her bag, thanked the driver, and stepped down onto the sidewalk. The bus pulled away. Julia Brenner turned left and began walking toward her apartment, 3 blocks north. She never made it home. Patricia Brenner called her daughter at 10:30 p.m. Julia didn't answer. Patricia wasn't immediately concerned. Julia often went to bed early on Fridays after working a double shift. Patricia left a voicemail asking about brunch plans and said goodnight. Saturday morning arrived. Patricia called again at 9:00 a.m. No answer. She called at 10:30 a.m. Still nothing. By noon, Patricia's concern had transformed into something sharper. Julia always answered her mother's calls. Always. Patricia drove to Julia's apartment. She knocked. No response. She called the building superintendent, who agreed to unlock the door. The apartment was empty. Julia's work shoes sat by the door. Her morning coffee mug was in the sink from Thursday. Her bed was made. Everything appeared normal, except for one critical detail. Julia wasn't there. Patricia called the Lakewood Police Department at 1:47 p.m. on Saturday, November 4th. Detective Frank Yates took the report. Julia Brenner was officially listed as a missing person. Yates ran the standard protocol, checked hospitals, checked jail records, called Julia's workplace, contacted known friends. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her credit cards showed no activity after Friday morning. Her social media accounts had gone silent. Julia Brenner had simply vanished. Detective Yates pulled the Transit Authority records. The number 47 bus had dropped Julia at Riverside and Hayes at 9:18 p.m. on Friday. Yates requested footage from nearby security cameras. The corner had 2, one mounted on the awning of a closed dry cleaner, another across the street, monitoring the ATM at a credit union branch. The dry cleaner camera captured Julia stepping off the bus. She walked north on Riverside Avenue. The footage showed her passing beneath a streetlight at 9:19 p.m. She was alone. She appeared calm. The ATM camera had a wider angle. It captured the same moment from across the street. Julia walked past the dry cleaner. The footage quality was grainy, but investigators could make out her gray peacoat and dark tote bag. At 9:20 p.m., a figure entered the frame behind her. A man, tall, dark jacket, walking in the same direction, maintaining distance. The footage was too grainy to see his face clearly. At 9:21 p.m., Julia reached the edge of the camera's range and disappeared from view. The man followed 5 seconds later. Neither reappeared. Detective Yates knocked on doors along Riverside Avenue. Most residents were home that Friday night. Several remembered seeing the number 47 bus stop at the corner. No one remembered seeing Julia Brenner. No one remembered hearing anything unusual. One elderly woman, Mrs. Ellen Cross, lived 2 buildings down from where Julia disappeared from camera view. She told Yates she had been watching television that evening with the window open. At around 9:20 p.m., she heard a man's voice on the street, calm, conversational. She couldn't make out the words. She heard a woman respond briefly, then silence. Mrs. Cross didn't think anything of it at the time. People walked past her building every evening. Yates requested Julia's phone records from her carrier. The last activity on her phone occurred at 9:19 p.m., a notification from a social media app. The phone pinged a cell tower on Riverside Avenue. At 9:24 p.m., the phone powered off or lost signal completely. It never reconnected. The search was now a race against time. Detective Yates assembled a task force. They canvassed a 6-block radius around Riverside and Hayes. They interviewed every resident, every business owner, every person who worked night shifts in the area. They reviewed footage from every camera they could find. The breakthrough came on Tuesday, November 7th, 4 days after Julia's disappearance. A liquor store 3 blocks south of the bus stop had exterior cameras. The footage showed the same man from the ATM camera walking south on Riverside at 8:50 p.m., 28 minutes before Julia's bus arrived. He stopped at the bus shelter near the corner. He appeared to check his phone. He waited. The store owner confirmed the man had not entered his shop that evening. Traffic cameras 2 blocks east captured the same man arriving on foot at 8:45 p.m. Investigators traced his route backward through a patchwork of security footage and traffic cameras. The trail ended at a residential street 4 blocks away. The cameras showed the man exiting a vehicle, a dark blue sedan, and walking toward Riverside Avenue. The license plate was visible for exactly 3 frames. The vehicle was registered to Kofi Mensah, 38, of 1847 Porter Street. No prior criminal record. No outstanding warrants. Employment records showed he worked as a night custodian at Lakewood Community College. Detective Yates ran a full background check. Mensah had immigrated to the United States from Ghana in 2017 on a work visa. He lived alone in a basement apartment. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, kept to himself. He attended church sporadically. He sent money back to family in Accra every month. Nothing about Kofi Mensah's profile suggested violence. On Wednesday, November 8th, Detective Yates and 3 other officers knocked on Mensah's door at 6:00 a.m. Mensah answered. He was calm. He invited them inside. The apartment was small, neat, sparsely furnished. A bed, a small table, a television. Religious pamphlets stacked on the counter. A photograph of an elderly woman, his mother, on the wall. Yates asked Mensah about his whereabouts on Friday, November 3rd. Mensah said he had been home that evening. He said he did not take the bus. He said he did not go anywhere near Riverside Avenue. Yates showed him the surveillance footage. Mensah's expression did not change. He said nothing. Yates asked if Mensah knew Julia Brenner. Mensah said he did not. Yates asked permission to search the apartment and the vehicle. Mensah hesitated. Then he agreed. The apartment yielded nothing obvious. No signs of struggle. No blood. No personal items belonging to Julia Brenner. The vehicle was parked on the street outside. The trunk was empty except for a spare tire and a gym bag containing work uniforms. But the forensic team found something. In the back seat, wedged beneath the floor mat, a single, stethoscope-shaped keychain. Julia Brenner's keychain. Kofi Mensah was arrested at 9:15 a.m. on charges of kidnapping. He did not resist. He did not speak. At the station, Mensah requested an attorney. The interrogation was scheduled for later that afternoon. Detective Yates had his suspect, but he did not have Julia Brenner. The interrogation room at Lakewood Police Department is small, windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. A table, 2 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner. Kofi Mensah sat across from Detective Yates and Assistant District Attorney Laura Higgins. His court-appointed attorney, Marcus Feldman, sat beside him. Mensah's hands were folded on the table. His face was expressionless. Yates placed the keychain on the table between them. The interrogation lasted 7 hours. Yates presented the evidence methodically. The surveillance footage showing Mensah waiting at the bus stop, the traffic cameras tracking his route, the keychain found in his vehicle, the phone records showing Julia's phone going dark at 9:24 p.m., consistent with the timeline of her walking past where Mensah had been waiting. Mensah said nothing. Feldman repeatedly advised his client to remain silent. Mensah followed that advice. Ada Higgins leaned forward. She told Mensah that Julia's family was desperate. She told him that cooperation could mean the difference between life in prison and the possibility of leniency. She told him they already had enough evidence to convict him of kidnapping. The only question was whether Julia Brenner was still alive. Mensah's eyes flickered to the keychain. Then he spoke. 3 sentences. Calm. Measured. He said Julia Brenner was alive. He said he would provide her location. He said he wanted a deal in writing first. The interrogation stopped. Ada Higgins and Detective Yates stepped into the hallway. They had a decision to make. Under normal circumstances, they would not negotiate with a kidnapper. But Julia Brenner had been missing for 5 days. If she was alive, every hour mattered. Higgins called the district attorney. 20 minutes later, a deal was drafted. In exchange for Julia's location and full cooperation, the prosecution would recommend a reduced sentence, 30 years with possibility of parole instead of life without parole. Mensah reviewed the document. He signed it. Then he provided an address. 2847 Industrial Road, an abandoned warehouse on the eastern edge of the city, near the old rail yard. The building had been condemned 3 years earlier. It was scheduled for demolition, but had been delayed due to permit issues. Detective Yates mobilized every available unit: patrol cars, tactical teams, ambulances. They arrived at the warehouse at 4:30 p.m., just as the November sun began to set. The building was massive, 3 stories of rusted metal and broken windows. The main entrance was chained shut. Tactical teams cut the chains and entered. The warehouse was dark, cold, cavernous. Pigeons roosted in the rafters. The concrete floor was littered with debris, broken pallets, old machinery, shattered glass. They found her in the basement. Julia Brenner was alive. She was handcuffed to a pipe along the far wall. She was dehydrated, hypothermic, barely conscious. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her wrists were raw from the restraints. She had been given minimal water and no food for 5 days, but she was breathing. Paramedics stabilized her on site. She was transported to Lakewood General Hospital under police escort. Patricia Brenner met her daughter in the emergency room. Julia survived. Julia Brenner spent 4 days in the hospital recovering from severe dehydration, hypothermia, and shock. She could not speak for the first 2 days. When she finally could, she told investigators what had happened. Kofi Mensah had approached her at 9:20 p.m. on Riverside Avenue, moments after she stepped off the bus. He asked if she knew where the nearest all-night pharmacy was located. His English was accented but clear. He seemed polite. Harmless, Julia stopped to help. She pointed north and started to give directions. Mensah moved quickly. He grabbed her arm, pressed something cold and metallic against her ribs. She thought it was a gun, and told her not to scream. He walked her to his vehicle, parked on a side street 30 yards away. He zip-tied her hands. He drove her to the warehouse. He handcuffed her in the basement. He returned twice over the next 5 days. He brought water in plastic bottles. He said nothing to her. He did not touch her beyond the initial restraints. He did not explain why he had taken her. Julia asked him repeatedly to let her go. She begged. She cried. She promised she wouldn't tell anyone. Mensah never responded. On the fourth day, he stopped coming. Julia thought she was going to die in that basement. The psychiatric evaluation of Kofi Mensah was completed 3 weeks after his arrest. Dr. Raymond Cole, a forensic psychologist, conducted multiple interviews. His report painted a troubling picture. Mensah had suffered severe trauma as a child in Ghana. His father had been abusive. His mother had died when Mensah was 12. He had been essentially homeless for several years before immigrating to the United States. He had no history of violence in Ghana or after arriving in America. But he had developed what Dr. Cole described as dissociative episodes, periods where he felt detached from reality and from his own actions. Mensah told Dr. Cole that he didn't fully remember taking Julia. He remembered waiting at the bus stop. He remembered seeing her step off the bus. He remembered thinking she looked kind. Then his memory became fragmented. He remembered being in the warehouse. He remembered bringing water. He remembered feeling like he was watching himself from outside his body. Dr. Cole diagnosed Mensah with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative features. He concluded that Mensah was not legally insane. He understood right from wrong, but that his capacity had been significantly impaired by untreated mental illness. The prosecution did not find this persuasive. ADA Higgins argued that Mensah's actions were calculated. He had waited for Julia specifically. He had transported her to a pre-selected location. He had restrained her in a way that prevented escape, but kept her alive. These were not the actions of someone experiencing a dissociative episode. These were the actions of someone executing a plan. Forensic teams searched Mensah's apartment more thoroughly. They found a journal hidden beneath the floorboards. The entries were sparse, written in a mix of English and Twi. Most were mundane observations about his work, his loneliness, his desire to return to Ghana someday. But 3 entries stood out. On October 15th, Mensah wrote about seeing a woman at a bus stop. He described her smile. He wrote that she reminded him of someone from his childhood, a girl named Abena, who had been kind to him when no one else was. On October 28th, he wrote about feeling invisible. He wrote that Americans looked through him, not at him. He wrote that he wanted someone to see him. On November 1st, 2 days before Julia's abduction, he wrote a single sentence: "I will not be invisible anymore." The journal entries were submitted as evidence. The trial of Kofi Mensah began on April 12th, 6 months after Julia Brenner's rescue. The prosecution's case was straightforward. ADA Laura Higgins presented the surveillance footage, the keychain, Julia's testimony, and the journal entries. She argued that Mensah had planned the abduction, executed it methodically, and held Julia captive with full awareness of his actions. She acknowledged his traumatic history, but emphasized that trauma does not grant immunity from the law. Higgins was direct in her closing argument. Trauma may explain behavior. It does not justify it. The defense, led by Marcus Feldman, focused on Mensah's mental state. Feldman called Dr. Cole to testify about the dissociative episodes. He presented records showing Mensah had sought mental health services twice in the past, but had been turned away due to lack of insurance. He argued that Mensah's actions were the result of untreated mental illness, not criminal intent. Julia Brenner testified on the 3rd day of the trial. She described the abduction calmly, though her hands shook as she spoke. She identified Mensah as the man who had taken her. She described the 5 days in the basement, the cold, the hunger, the fear, the certainty that she would die. Feldman asked Julia if Mensah had harmed her beyond the initial restraint. Julia said he had not. Feldman asked if Mensah had spoken to her during those 5 days. Julia said he had not. Feldman asked if she believed Mensah intended to kill her. Julia paused. She said she didn't know what he intended. She only knew what he did. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. They found Kofi Mensah guilty of kidnapping in the 1st degree. They found him guilty of unlawful restraint. They found him not guilty of attempted murder. The prosecution had been unable to prove intent to kill. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Under the plea agreement Mensah had signed, the prosecution recommended 30 years with possibility of parole. Judge Sandra Moreno had final say. Julia Brenner submitted a victim impact statement. She did not read it in court. It was submitted in writing. In the statement, Julia described the nightmares that still wake her. She described the hypervigilance, the way she now checks over her shoulder constantly, the way she cannot ride the bus anymore, the way she cannot walk alone after dark. She described quitting her job at the hospital because the evening shifts triggered panic attacks. She described the therapy sessions, the medications, the slow, painful process of reclaiming her sense of safety. She also wrote about Kofi Mensah. She wrote that she did not believe he was evil. She wrote that she believed he was deeply broken. She wrote that what happened to her should never happen to anyone else, and that she hoped he would get the mental health treatment he clearly needed. But she also wrote that she would never feel completely safe again. Judge Moreno read the statement aloud during sentencing. Then she delivered her ruling. She acknowledged Mensah's traumatic history. She acknowledged the failures of the mental health system. But she emphasized that Julia Brenner would carry the consequences of his actions for the rest of her life. Kofi Mensah was sentenced to 35 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He was remanded to state custody immediately. Julia Brenner attended the sentencing. She did not speak. When the sentence was read, she closed her eyes and exhaled. Patricia Brenner held her daughter's hand. The trial was over. Julia Brenner lives with her mother now. She could not return to the apartment on Riverside Avenue. Patricia converted the guest room into Julia's space. The walls are painted lavender. There are photographs of Julia's younger sister, of family vacations, of better times. Julia has not returned to work. She's enrolled in online classes, working toward a certification in medical coding, a job she can do from home. She attends therapy twice a week. She takes medication for anxiety and insomnia. She is learning to sleep without nightmares. Some days are better than others. The keychain shaped like a stethoscope was returned to Julia after the trial concluded. It sits in a drawer in her room. She has not attached it to her keys again. She cannot bring herself to throw it away. Patricia Brenner became an advocate for victims of violent crime. She speaks at community meetings about the gaps in mental health services and the need for better support systems. She volunteers with a nonprofit that provides resources to families of missing persons. The number 47 bus still runs its route through Lakewood. The stop at Riverside and Hayes remains. Commuters step off the bus there every evening. Most of them reach their destination safely. Kofi Mensah is incarcerated at State Correctional Facility in the northern part of the state. He has been diagnosed formally with complex PTSD and receives psychiatric treatment. He participates in therapy groups. He has expressed remorse in letters submitted to the court. He will be eligible for parole in 2049. He will be 63 years old. Julia Brenner will be 49. The warehouse on Industrial Road was demolished in 2024. The lot remains empty. There are plans to build affordable housing there, but funding has not been secured. There is no memorial at the site. Nothing marks what happened there. Julia Brenner knows. She will always know. On quiet evenings, when the sun sets and the streetlights flicker on, Patricia sometimes watches her daughter stare out the window. Julia looks at the street below with the expression of someone who has learned that safety is never guaranteed. That a simple act of kindness, stopping to give directions, can change everything. Julia survived. That is what matters most. But survival is not the same as being whole. The woman in the gray peacoat stepped off the bus at 9:18 p.m. on November 3rd. The cameras never saw her again as the person she had been that morning. Confident, independent, planning a future. That version of Julia Brenner vanished somewhere on Riverside Avenue. The woman who returned from the warehouse is someone different. She is learning to live with what remains.